Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are in the world. I'm Nikki Francis, an Associate Consultant of YLT Consultants, and I'd like to talk to you about Strand 4, Diversity and Inclusion. Getting children and teenagers back into school, looking after their mental health, are the main priorities in education globally right now. As educators, we have a social and moral responsibility to ensure all children and teenagers are treated fairly and feel included regardless of their ethnicity, the color of their skin, their religion or beliefs, their gender identity, their sexual orientation, their abilities or disabilities, both visible and invisible, or their social background, and are given equal opportunities to reach their full potential. Recent reports in the UK highlight the importance of diversity and inclusion in education. Ofsted published an EDI statement in June 2020 to its inspection framework to ensure schools are, and I quote, promoting equality and diversity and eliminating discrimination in line with the Equality Act 2010. The Pearson Diversity and Inclusion in Schools report last year states, research suggests that children and young people are more likely to be bullied in schools because of their race, faith, gender, disability, sexual orientation, or trans status. The impact of the pandemic is dramatic and unfortunately will continue to be so for the foreseeable future. And research also shows that children and teenagers from disadvantaged groups have suffered the most. So who are these disadvantaged groups? Ethnic minority groups, children and teenagers with special educational needs and disabilities, visible and invisible, single women with young children and or teenagers, refugees and asylum seekers, members of the LGBTQI+ community. The list goes on and may vary depending on where you are in the world, but the sad truth is that these children and teenagers are already at a disadvantage. So what can we do to close this gap and reach equity of opportunity? Some questions we should ask ourselves in order to professionalize YLT. Are we creating diverse, safe, inclusive learning and working environments? And what do these look like? Are we nurturing an inclusive culture? Are we role modeling inclusive behaviors? If mental health is a major concern, what are we doing to support our children and teenagers to be their authentic self, to bring their authentic selves to class, to be able to learn and thrive? Let's remind ourselves of this simple phrase, if you can't see it, you can't be it. So who exactly are children and teenagers seeing? Are we using inclusive hiring practices, blind recruitment? Do they see themselves in the educators and adults around them? Are we challenging organizations that are still advertising for native speakers? I think we can all agree that this really has to stop now. How well do you know the children and teenagers in your classrooms? How diverse are they? Are you tapping into the rich cultural capital in your classrooms? Have you heard about those superpowers of neurodiverse children and teenagers and adults? How can you use them, harness them, and stop labeling? Are all the voices in your classrooms being heard? And are you being an ally? Do you know their pronouns? Do they know yours? Pronouns are not equal gender, but identity. And using the correct ones is not a preference, but actually a validation. By bringing our authentic selves to the classroom and feeling a real sense of belonging, extraordinary things will happen. What about the resources we're using? Have you carried out an inclusion audit with your materials or course books, curriculum, picture books? How many of the protagonists are girls? How many of the protagonists are children or teenagers of color? How many are refugees, wear a hijab, use a wheelchair, have two dads or two mums, are non-binary? Are the children and teenagers actively involved in doing this audit with you? Do your materials reflect the diversity of your class and include everyone? Representation really is important. If you can't see it, you can't be it. As English language teachers, the words we use are key. The language of diversity and inclusion is evolving all the time, so we really must endeavour to keep up to date with the latest terminology and use it in our lessons. For example, do you know what allyship is, or intersectionality? Where are you on the wheel of power and privilege? If you don't know, research, read, learn, and share, and never be afraid to call people out and challenge offensive language and behaviour. We'd like to call the YLT industry to action to celebrate, not tolerate our uniquenesses, our quirks, our differences, and our similarities, to embed an inclusive culture and behaviours that children and teenagers will take beyond the classroom to change the world.